Hello, welcome to episode 2 of the currently unnamed talk show. In this episode, we're really going to get into my opinions and the results of the first round of the college football playoffs. And I'm also going to get into a segment that was brought to me by my dad. He recommended I do a receiver segment. So for this one, this is what he requested. I'm going to do a receiver winner and loser of the year. But first, let's get into the games. So first game, obviously Friday night, Notre Dame versus Indiana. And honestly, my biggest takeaways are kind of things I already knew. Notre Dame's defense was amazing. I think they're top 5 in the country. And their run game is amazing. I mean, obviously, passing-wise, they're not fantastic. I think everyone knew that. But Jeremiah Love, he's the real deal. He's one of the best running backs in the country. I know I said that in my last episode, but just reiterating it, I think he could be a problem for Georgia. And honestly, if they win, for anyone in the country. And I think adding Riley Leonard to that is also going to be a problem for them. I think their run defense was amazing. Realistically, their whole defense was amazing. I mean, Indiana for really probably 53 minutes of the game didn't have anything. Notre Dame's defense was just stopping him on all sides of the ball. For Indiana, I'd say their biggest things were probably, Curtis Rourke, he just couldn't find his rhythm the whole game. I mean, from the start, you could see he was missing throws. That interception was kind of unlike him, I'd say. I just don't think he found a rhythm, and especially with quarterback in the playoffs, you need to have a quarterback who can lead them out there, and I don't think he was doing that at all. It doesn't help. I mean, that the defense was kind of shutting everything down, but I think him not being himself out there and losing rhythm was one of the things. And there was a late hit out of bounds on Indiana in the third quarter at about 7 minutes and 30 seconds left in the quarter. And I think, honestly, I remember that moment because I remember Notre Dame's up by a lot. I mean, they're driving down the field, and that kind of just, to me, put icing on the cake for the game, because at that point, Indiana loses their composure. And I know we've seen Kurt Signetti. He's one of those coaches that it's discipline. You know, you're gonna do stuff to the book, like how he wants it to be done. And at that point, I could tell that they lost their composure. Their minds were not there in the game, and they were gonna lose. So, looking to Notre Dame, Georgia, I think this will be a semi-close game for the reason that Georgia is playing with a backup quarterback. Now, I will say, the past 2 backup quarterbacks they've had have won national championship, have led them to national championships. My apologies. So I think the thing with Georgia, and this has always been like this, they've never had a standout quarterback. I mean, when they won with Stetson Bennett, he was never a standout quarterback. The thing with Georgia is their all-around team and their defense. But Notre Dame held Indiana to 4 out of 12 on third down, which for a team like Indiana, they were amazing the whole season on third down. They were a great team on third down. But they held them to 4 for 12 on third downs. They also had 193 rushing yards, which is insane. I mean, almost 200 rushing yards in a game. Now, my thing for Georgia that I think is going to help them is they're fast. I mean, it was very apparent to me in the SEC championship that they have probably the fastest defense in the country. Their defensive line is speedy fast, and kind of this goes against Notre Dame because if Jeremiah Love can't get away from them, I mean, even their linebacker, everyone on their team is fast. So if Jeremiah Love can't get that separation from the front 7, he's not gonna have a big game because they're gonna shut everything down. And Georgia's their run defensive average 133 rushing yards per game, which in hindsight isn't horrible. It's not great, but I think for them to beat Notre Dame, they're going to have to stay close to that because Notre Dame's going to run the ball a lot. They're going to get yards. I'd say anywhere from 100 to being generous 150 is what they need. But they've held defenses to 20 points per game. They held Texas to 15-19, under 20, which is one of the probably the best offenses in the country, and they held Tennessee to 17, which I don't think Tennessee's offense is great, but nonetheless, those are two playoff teams that they held to under 20 points. So I think Notre Dame's defense is going to have to stop the offense a lot, and I think the biggest thing in this game could be field position. I think if Notre Dame can start with good field position, they can end up scoring easier, and vice versa with Georgia, because I think this is going to be a defensive game. So I really think it comes down to field position and special teams in a sense. The next game, the 12 o'clock game on Saturday, Penn State versus SMU. This game really wasn't close. I thought it was going to be closer than it was. I thought SMU starting it with a lot of tempo was really smart. It was working. And I think that could be an issue in the future, because Oregon did the same thing, and we saw Penn State could not handle it. So going against teams like Boise, who run the ball a lot, going against Georgia or Notre Dame, teams all run the ball a lot. I think tempo is Penn State's biggest issue. But I think that interception just changed the momentum of the game, that pick six, because Penn State's offense wasn't moving the ball. SMU's wasn't necessarily moving the ball. But that interception, putting points on the board for Penn State and SMU having to come back from that, kind of just ruined it. It doesn't help Jennings, their quarterback. He was rattled. He was not ready for that game. 3 interceptions. The third one wasn't fully his fault, but 2 pick sixes. After that second pick six, it was kind of a done deal at that point. But looking to Penn State's next game against Boise State, obviously for Boise State, we know Ashton Jeanty, 2,500 yards, 29 touchdowns, averaging 192 yards per game, which is insane. He has 1,889 yards after contact, which is crazy. I believe that's like second or third in the country. Just let alone without people breaking contact. So he's obviously the highlight of this Boise State offense. But Maddox Madsen, 7-1 touchdown interception ratio, 22 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. I think he's good enough to where if you need him to make throws, he can. I don't think he's one of those guys that can lead his team, because we've seen it the whole season. It's Ashton Jeanty. But I think you get into those 7-8 man boxes, I think he can make the throws that a team needs to win. So I wouldn't completely just say you stop Ashton Jeanty, you win. The corners have to play great man defense, and there's other factors. But Penn State, they're allowing 109 rushing yards per game, which obviously is not close to what Ashton Jeanty has. So they can hold Ashton Jeanty to 109 rushing yards. I think they win the game. They had 3 turnovers in the last game, and they held SMU to only 10 points, who averages 39 points a game. So we've seen everyone we've known, but Penn State's defense is definitely, in my opinion, one of the few defenses that can stop Ashton Jeanty. But at the end of the day, that's all it comes down. If you stop Ashton Jeanty, you have a very good shot to win. I think Drew Allard, Penn State's offense as a whole can score on Boise. So at the end of the day, you really just need to stop Ashton Jeanty to the point where they have no chance. Choice but to throw. And I think Penn State comes out with that game. I forgot to say this, but I think Georgia is going to come out with the win against Notre Dame. And I think Penn State is going to come out with the win against Boise State. Next game, we had Texas versus Clemson. I think Texas, with Quinn Ewers back, this is probably the first complete game they've played. Quinn Ewers played way better than he did in the SEC Championship. There's still some throws that he needs to make and stuff he needs to work on, but from what I saw from the SEC Championship to this game, I think he improved a lot, and that's in my opinion all they needed to make a national championship push. Cade Klubnik, sorry. He surprised me a lot. He played very poised. He was taking what they gave him, a lot of short throws. He was able to extend plays. I kind of wrote him off earlier in the season. I guess I wasn't super confident, but he surprised me a lot. I think him coming back next year will be huge for Clemson. And surprisingly, I never thought I'd ever say that I liked Clemson or was somewhat rooting for Clemson, but that kind of happened. Looking at I don't know what it was, but I liked them this year. I still don't like Dabo Swinney, obviously. I don't think I'll ever like Dabo Swinney, but Clemson, just the team, just the players, I was supporting them. I think that fourth quarter goal line stand they had at similar to about 7 minutes, 30 seconds in the game where Clemson was inside the 5, stopped them, I believe, 2 or 3 times in a row. That, in my opinion, was just the icing on the cake. After that, Texas held the ball for just about the rest of the game. So that was huge, and that kind of shows how good their defense is. But looking to that game, we have Texas versus Arizona State. Arizona State obviously has Cam Scatterbo, who had 1,500 yards and 19 touchdowns. They had a 1,000-yard receiver in Jordan Tyson, about 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns. But one thing that worries me, he doubles the team in receptions, and I believe Cam Scatterbo second in receptions. So for a team like Texas, who had a John Thorpe, I believe, winner, if you can shut down Jordan Tyson, I don't think they have those other receivers that can be dynamic in the game. And then you have Sam Levitt, who threw for 2,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions, but he's a true freshman. And we've obviously seen true freshmen who are balling out this season, but as a quarterback, that's probably the hardest position to do it at. As we saw from Dylan Raiola, struggled towards the end of the season. So I'm not sure how he'll do against this Texas defense, who I think might be the best defense in the country. And then for Texas, they held Clemson to 24 points a game, who they were averaging 36. So kind of like I was just saying, I think this Texas defense is by far the best defense Arizona State has faced, especially being in the Big 12. And I just think Texas's defense is going to be too good and too dominant for Arizona State to really get together in offense. So I'm picking Texas in that game. And then finally, my most anticipated game to watch, just because I wanted to see what they were going to do, how they were going to bounce back, Ohio State, Tennessee. Safe to say, Ohio State's passing game is unstoppable. It is up to the man in the booth, Chip Kelly, on how dominant he wants them to be on game day. But, in my opinion, they have the 2 best receivers in the country. And I think they have 3 top 7, top 10 receivers. Carnell Tate had 1 reception in that game, and he can get going. Emeka Egbuka, who I personally think is the best receiver in this upcoming draft class, he's unstoppable. And then, Jeremiah Smith, I honestly could be overreacting, genuinely think he's the best receiver in the country as a true freshman. Unstoppable, 6 receptions, 103 yards, 2 touchdowns. Yeah, I think their passing game is unstoppable, and it's solely up to Chip Kelly on whether or not they want to dominate in the pass game or not. One thing is, I don't think they can run inside. I think they tried to do it in Michigan, didn't work. They tried to do it in Tennessee, didn't work. You have 2 very fast running backs in Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. I don't see why you'd ever want to run inside, but they need to start running outside. It works. We've seen it work. If they want to establish a run game, it has to be outside. That team is too fast. They need to be on the perimeter. Everyone on that offense. And then going to Tennessee, I think for them offensively, I think them simplifying the game worked for them. Nico, he was having a lot of short passes, which for him I think is good to get him into a momentum. He had a lot of QB, he had a lot of scrambles, but I think for him that was really all they could do. They probably could have maybe taken a couple more deep shots, but Ohio State's defensive line was getting to him so quickly. They didn't really have the chance to do that. But going on to Ohio State's defense, their corners are by far the worst part of their defense, and something that's going to need to change, especially in their next game. I think Denzel Burke, we've seen him have a lot of struggles. I think in this game, Davison Igbinosun had some struggles, and those are their two starting corners. So they're going to have to be on their A game for this next game, which, in my opinion, and I think everyone's opinion, is the most anticipated game of the season. I can't emphasize how excited I am for this. Ohio State versus Oregon, the rematch in the Rose Bowl of all stadiums. I mean, you can't get better than this. The last game they played, 63 points scored between both teams. It came down to literally 1 second on the clock. An error made, ended up having Oregon win. But in that game, both quarterbacks had over 300 yards passing, two touchdowns, and no interceptions. So both of them were on their A game. Ohio State had 141 rushing yards to Oregon's 155. These teams are probably, I won't even say probably, these teams are the two best teams in the country. Talent-wise, you look at Oregon's offense, Dylan Gabriel, Tez Johnson, Jordan James, Evan Stewart, who I think is one of the most underrated players in the country, especially one of the most underrated receivers. I think Noah Ferguson's the name of their tight end. I could be wrong. Terrence, I forget his name. But, the teams are just so evenly matched. I think we saw that in the regular season. So this game is going to be, I think, the same. Against Tennessee, Will Howard went 24 for 29, 311 yards and 2 touchdowns. He did have that interception, but honestly, feeding Jeremiah Smith in the red zone at that point, I can't blame you for that. And then that was a defense who held Tennessee to 17 points. And then against Penn State, in Oregon's last game, Dylan Gabriel went 22 for 32, 283 yards and 4 touchdowns. And Tez Johnson had 11 receptions, 181 yards and 1 touchdown. So we've seen them do it against great defenses too. I think this game is going to be absolutely amazing. I would expect about the same score. I think both teams are going to be in the 30s, honestly even 40s, depending on how Ohio State wants to call it. And as much as I want to say I'm backing Ohio State because I think they have the best roster, they have the most complete team, I'm not fully sold on the coaching there, and I think Oregon's coaching is just too good. I think Dan Lanning has really shaped a culture at Oregon, and I'm just not confident enough in Ohio State's coaching to fully say they're going to win. So in that game, I'm picking Oregon to win by less than 6 points probably. It's gonna be another nail-biting game. Those are my predictions. I have Penn State winning, Texas winning, Oregon winning, and Georgia winning. And then to get into the last segment, another thing that I was requested to do is talk about the current state of college football, because I was a collegiate football player. I stopped playing recently, so I've kind of experienced what it's like. So first off, I'm gonna talk about the college football playoff and the current state of that. Obviously, this year was the first year they switched to 12 teams, which I personally think 12 is too many, but I think it is a massive improvement from 4 teams, because I think in a lot of cases 4 is just never enough. And I think with NIL, teams are becoming more diverse and even. And I think this was the perfect year to switch to 12, because I genuinely think, especially out of the 8 teams left, any of them can win the national championship, because that's just how the season's been for me. But I think 12 is too many, just because I think in some ways teams are getting rewarded for losing. But I personally think that 8 is the best, because with 8 you could say 4 conference champions and then just 4 at large, which it could be 4 conference champs. It could just be, 4 other teams, or 4 conference runner-ups, or 4 other teams. But in there, it makes losses matter. And this is my next thing, is the SEC schools. There's been a lot of talk about how the SEC kind of got slighted because it's a better conference. But at the end of the day, I don't think a 3-loss Alabama team should make the playoffs over a 1-loss Indiana team, or even a 2-loss SMU team, because if you look at Alabama's losses, they lost to an unranked Oklahoma team, an unranked Vanderbilt team, and then I'm not quite sure who the third. Oh, a Tennessee team. And you look at Ole Miss, they lost to unranked LSU, unranked Florida, unranked Kentucky. So at the end of the day, is the SEC the best conference in college football? I'd argue it is, and I think most people would. But at the end of the day, if you put them in, you're not punishing teams for losing. And at the end of the day, the only thing you can't argue is winning. I mean, you look at Oregon. There was no doubt they should be the 1 seed because they went undefeated. So at the end of the day, if you want to make an argument, just win. No one's going to take credit away from you for winning. You can never discredit a team for winning because at the end of the day, that's what you're supposed to do. So that's kind of my thing about the SEC. And if you're really good enough, you're going to win those games. Who's to say, Ole Miss would have done better against Penn State when they couldn't even beat Kentucky or Florida, So that's kind of my take on that. I think these SEC lovers don't fully understand that. And I mean, you look at it, I believe Tennessee had the largest margin of points scored. So yeah, I think just at the end of the day, win. That's all I can really say. I think conferences should only matter when it's like this close to where you look at it and it's like they had a harder strength of schedule playing in this conference, so they're gonna get in. But I think, if you win with what the teams you play, because teams don't also fully dictate their schedule. So if you win with the games put in front of you, that's your bid at the end of the day. There's never undefeated teams that don't really make it. And then I mentioned NIL earlier, getting into that, because that really is what college football is at this point. It's out of hand. I think everyone could realize that. But at the same time, there's no true solution, in my opinion, to it. Because I've seen people say, oh, NIL should be based off of the revenue you bring in, the ticket sales, all that. But at the end of the day, if you do that, you're still going to have the domino effect where the higher schools are going to bring in more money than the lower schools. And at that point, it's still the same thing. So there really is no genuine restriction you can put that I can think of right now that would actually improve the situation that NIL is in. The one thing I will say is players demanding money in college should not happen, but that it won't stop because the schools have the money, and at the end of the day, they care about their team and performance. They don't care about the fact that 18-year-olds are basically signing new deals and demanding money to stay at a school. Safe to say it is becoming a job, though. You saw Dylan Stewart demanding $1.5 million to stay at South Carolina. It's becoming contracts and it's becoming jobs, and it's just, I didn't expect NIL to become this, but I also think for one, am going to advocate for NIL because I do think that these players, college players who create a name for themselves and are talked about a lot, should have the opportunity to get their name, image, and likeness out there and sign brand deals because they're being talked about a lot and kind of used anyways. So I think they should be able to be paid for that. I think it'd be wrong to say you shouldn't be. And at the end of the day, like, if boosters are willing to pay, I think that should be a thing too. Obviously it's crazy what it's gotten to, but if you're a school and you can get your boosters to donate enough money to pay these people, I don't see why not. Now demanding money and whatnot, I definitely think is a little absurd, but I definitely think NIL I don't think it should ever go away. Just because I think it takes a certain right and privilege away from the players. And my dad also brought up a possibility of a group of 5 playoff. if to make it more fair and even. And I wouldn't be opposed to that. I'd give it a couple years to see how they do in the 12-team playoff because, I mean, Boise State's a group of 5 team. So I'd like to see how they do in the playoff, but if this is thing of just they're not making it, I wouldn't be opposed to turning it into a group of 5 playoff. I think it would make it better and more fair for the group of 5 teams. Because I think there's a lot of good, solid group of 5 schools out there who don't have the resources or whatever the reason is on why their teams aren't as good. So yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I think we should wait a couple years to see how this new playoff format goes. And the last segment of the show is the wide receiver segment. So for this one, I'm going to do a winner and a loser. I'm going to start off with the winner. Now, this guy I personally think is the 4th best receiver in football, who I think could creep into top 3 soon, and that's A.J. Brown. I think A.J. Brown's been a baller since he got into the league. He was a baller in Tennessee, and then when he got to the Eagles, his career just took off. But this season, he's only played 12 games, but he's averaging 87 yards per game, which is fantastic. He is 10th currently in receiving yards at 1,043, which is his 5th 1,000-yard season out of 6. And in the 6th, and the one he didn't get it, he only played 13 games, and that's going along with 6 touchdowns. So I'm calling him my winner because I think he's under the radar a lot, and I personally think more people should be talking about him. I think when you look at his stats, like, he doesn't get a lot of receptions, which does kind of blow my mind. But he's always putting up good numbers. I mean, 87 yards per game is fantastic. I mean, any top receiver is putting up, in my opinion, anything probably higher than 70. The elites are putting up anything higher than 80. So I could talk about A.J. Brown forever, but he's going to be my winner of this week. And my loser is Garrett Wilson. And this kind of sparked this whole segment. Was my dad sent me this thing about him requesting a trade, and I honestly can't blame him. I mean, you look at this season, before Devontae Adams gets traded, in the 6 games he played, he had 41 receptions on 67 targets and 399 yards. He was averaging 7 receptions a game, 11 targets a game, and 67 yards per game, which are all great numbers. As I was just talking about, 67 is probably a little low, but at the end of the day, those are pretty solid stats. In my opinion, this is something I could talk about receivers forever. Your star receiver should be getting targeted at least 8 times a game, and that's at least. They should be in double digits. Like the Justin Jeffersons, the Jamar Chase, the CeeDee Lambs, the A.J. Browns, like Garrett Wilson, they should be targeted 10 times a game. But you look at post-Adams, in the 9 games he's played, he has 49 receptions on 74 targets and 588 yards. So his yards are obviously more, but his targets, only 8 more targets in 3 games. Only 8 more receptions, only 7 more targets. So it's definitely gone down. He's still averaging 7 receptions, but only 8 targets a game, which is 3 less than before. And he's averaging 2 yards less per game. And he's a wide receiver 2 now. And at the end of the day, if Rodgers wants to work with Adams more, he's going to, because as we've seen, Rodgers gets what he wants at that place. And I think everyone knows Garrett Wilson is better than a wide receiver 2. This is Adams' first year with the Jets, so he came in mid-season. Next year, he's going to know the offense more. Him and Rodgers have more time to build their connection, which we know is one of the best duos of this decade. So if I was Garrett Wilson, I would request a trade too. Obviously, it sucks not being as productive towards the end of the season, but he's my loser just for the fact that he was doing so well, and now he's not getting as much recognition. But hopefully soon. Coming from Ohio State, obviously one of the best schools recently for receivers, which I will say is a little teaser for next week's winners and losers. We have some Buckeyes. I want to let you debate who you think it's going to be. But yeah, that's all I have. Next week, I'll obviously do my winners and losers. I'll do my reactions to the college football playoff games, and I might throw in some other segments. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.